I am Preeti, Assistant Professor from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. Our today's discussion is on risk management, part 2. So, in the previous video, we have seen that I have segregated the list of the agenda topics into two parts. That is, we discussed about the reactive versus proactive risk strategies in part 1. And then we have seen what exactly software risks are and how are you trying to identify the risks, wherein we subdivided the things into how do you assess the overall project and what are the components that are associated with these risk identification. So today, in our today's discussion, we are going to cover the risk projection, risk refinement, and RMMM. That stands for risk mitigation, monitoring, and management. And finally, the RMM plan. So the today's agenda is focusing on the projection, refinement, RMM plan. So a very fast gist on whatever we have seen previously is what exactly is risk? Risk is nothing but some kind of uncertainty that is being experienced during our project or a release of our product or in the working of our product, right? So let's start off with what is risk projection talking about. So when you say risk projection, the term here elaborates that in a much better way. That is, you are trying to estimate the risks. So till the previous things that is above the risk projection, what did we do? We have actually tried to find out the risk and try to analyze them, try to put them in an order, particular order. Now, the next step is how are you trying to estimate the risk? That is in terms called as how are you trying to project that risk? In what way are you trying to project that risk? So that can be done in two ways. That is, initially we will say that there are more chances of the risk to be real, right? How do you estimate a risk? Initially, we have stating that if the probability of the risk to be real, then you try to estimate that in the first cadre. Next, if you are trying to experience some consequences that have been arised during the project, then that also you are trying to associate them with some kind of risk, whether they happen or they may not happen. Okay, so I repeat, you can estimate the risks in two ways. That is, what are the chances of that risk to become real, that is in existing place, that is happening in the real-time applications. Next, what are the consequences of the problems? That also is related to what is a risk. Okay, now as we know, they are managers and the technical staff who try to take part in projecting the risk or try to help us out in how do you project some kind of risks or how can you estimate them. So they are again done in the four ways. That is, establish a scale that reflects the perceived likelihood of a risk. What does it say? Try to create a scale that can range from some 0 to 10. Whatever things are likely to happen, put them on a scale. That's the first step that can be done by any technical staff or manager, whoever is responsible for that particular project. Then try to find out some consequences of that particular risk. Once you have specified a scale, and then you are supposed to put them in a proper sequence, right? Now that is done. How much impact do they have? That has to be noted. How much impact will that particular things, whatever we have stated has to be estimated. Next, all this overall, that is assessing the overall accuracy of the risk projection, is also maintained. Okay, so I repeat, risk estimates are also called as risk projections. Till the previous step, that is above risk projection, we have identified, analyzed the different types of risks, who are the people involved, what types of risks do we have, like the project risk, business risk, technological risks, all these things. Now we are discussing of a stage where you are supposed to estimate what type of risk is it, how much level will it take us, and how can you bring the outputs of those things that has been analyzed. So we are trying to do that in two ways. One is to keep them in a stage where few risks are said to be real and some that is to the consequences of it. Now, what are the steps done by various people, like the people in the team, the technical staff, and the other managers? First, they try to scale up the likelihoodness, that is the probability of the risk. Then they put them in a proper sequence, and then you are trying to focus on the impact of those risks in a project or a product, and then try to make a complete overall accuracy picture. So moving further, we have a table that is talking about the different categories that you can talk about the risk and what are the components that are associated with this particular risk projection. So what do we call this as? The intent of these steps, whatever have been stated in this particular diagram, it is trying to consider risks in a manner that leads to prioritization. That is, as I told you, you are trying to estimate some risks and you are trying to put them on a scale of 0 to 10. We need to check what are the risks that are at the higher priority and what are the risks that are at a lower priority. So how can you segregate this higher priorities and the lower priority risks? By the help of this particular table that you can see here. So the main intention of this is it is trying to give us a prioritization feature, that is high priority risks and low priority risks. So if you have a look at the image over here, we have category and components. The components that are stated here are performance, support, cost, and the schedule. So these four are considered as a components. Now coming to the category, we have catastrophic category. What does this do? When some kind of risks occur, this catastrophic may lead to some damage of that particular project or a product. That means it is catastrophic. When you say critical, that is, sometimes the output may not be accurate. There are some critical phases, some difficult phases that have been occurring. That is the second type of category. Next, you say marginal. Marginal meaning very less or minor risks that can sometimes be ignored as well. And then negligible, that is completely ignored. You can ignore this. So I repeat, risks are categorized into four ways, that is catastrophic, critical, marginal, and negligible. So catastrophic is nothing but whenever you are talking about some risk, if those risks are creating a damage to the particular product, then you put them under the category of catastrophic. And then you will check for four of the components, like what is its performance, how much does it support, and what is the cost related to it, and what is the schedule related to that particular risks. So this table is trying to depict how much of prioritization we need to give to the risks that have been existed, whether they stand on a higher priority or they stand on a lower priority. So let us just check one by one what happens if your risks are catastrophic, right? And if you see, there are two numbers that have been stated, number 1 and number 2. If you just come down to the slide over here, on the number 1, we can see that it is, whenever you are talking about the number 1, it is nothing but the potential consequence. Consequence is nothing but the things that are reflecting once you are executing of undetected software errors. So these are something that where you are the consequences for some software errors which are not detected. That is coming under the categorization of 1. And then you have 2, it is the desired outcome is not achieved. So when you say 1, there are some undetected software errors, undetected. And when you say 2, it is like you have some desired outcome that is not achieved. So just have a look at what is happening for catastrophic in performance and support. Here we have failure to meet the requirements would result in mission failure. So as I said, catastrophic is nothing but the risks will damage your product or a project. When you obviously have a failure here, then there is a failure in the cost as well, trying to excess the cost. That is, too much cost, whatever you have put in also goes waste. Right? Now coming to the second category, here you may focus on some degradation in the technical performance. So we assume that there is a technological flaw, so there is a damage to it. And you don't have some softwares which are supported. So they are unsupportive softwares. Next, again it leads to some shortage of budgets, or there is no budget at all, and you cannot achieve the different lines of code. So this is all about the catastrophic. Next, coming to critical. As I said, critical are, you can try to solve them with 1-2 phases which are a bit difficult. For that, what is happening in the first one? What did I say for the first one? It is nothing but undetected software errors or faults that have been occurred. And point number 2 is nothing but desired outcome is not achieved. So when you say critical, it is like failure to meet the requirements would degrade the system. Okay, so that is if you are not able to answer some kind of notions, that is failure to meet the requirement would degrade system performance to some level. That is, if you're not able to answer all the risks that you have stated, it may degrade to a level. That is why you are terming them to be as critical. Now, when you come to cost and schedule, once the things are again degrading, what happens? It obviously will affect them in the terms of the failure rate, and the cost also will increase. Now, coming to the next one, that is marginal. Marginal is nothing but minimal risks. So what can happen in the minimal risks? You can have a second thought or a second plan for the things that are lying in the marginal risk. And obviously, you can have a proper support of recoverable schedules and some amount that can be added up or reduced. Right? And next, coming to negotiable. Negotiable meaning sometimes you may easily get the softwares which are readily available and there are no technical support or no technical performance required for negligible. That is, that particular risks can be ignored, so that if you ignore also, you will get the output. So those things come under the feature of the negligible category. And here, possible budget and achievable LOC, because if you are trying to remove whatever errors which are not there, obviously it is ready to execute the things. So this is all about how do you place the risks, whether you place them in the higher category or whether you place them in the lower category. So this is prioritization. Next. So to do all these particular things, whatever have been stated in the table, basing upon that, you are trying to develop a risk table. You are trying to develop a risk table. What is this risk table trying to tell you? It is trying to provide you with a simple technique of risk projection, meaning where does each risk stand? The table is trying to depict where does each risk stand. Now, how are you trying to jot them down in a particular table? The first column, that whatever we are taking, you are trying to list all the risks that have been existing risks in the first column, and each risk is being categorized in the second column. What are the categorization we have just seen, right? That is catastrophic, critical, marginal, and negligible. So your first column will have entire risks, and the second column will talk about the categorization of those risks. And in the table that we show, we have the two terms that says PS and BU, which have a major impact in the table. So PS stands for the project size, BU stands for the business risks. So these types of risks were discussed in our previous video. Okay, so the probability of occurrence of each risk is entered in the next column. So I repeat, to project the risk is of what category and it uses what component, we are trying to develop a risk table. That risk table comprises of the first column with the entire risks that the user has found out, the second column with the categorization of the risks, and it is talking about the project size and the business risk as well. And you also are including the probability of the occurrence of the risks in the next column. So having a look at the risk table that I have just told you, you can have a look at it. The first one, the first column is talking about all the different types of risks that can occur in a project or releasing a product, and its category, its probability, how much impact it has. So this is left blank, which we will be seeing what happens in an RMM plan or an RMM sheet. Okay, so what are the general risks that occur in a software development? Firstly, if you can have a look at this, it is estimating the size. Okay, size estimate, always or significantly is low. So this category comes under the project size, as I told you. And generally when it is saying it is low, you are trying to take the probability as 60%. So basing upon all these values, we are substituting it in the relevant mathematical expressions to get our output. Okay. So size estimation is low, which is considered as the project size. And another risk could be there are more number of users. Okay. More number of users also comes under the project size, which is telling them to be some 30%. So this probabilities will actually vary basing upon the project that we are trying to discuss. And you have planned some, or you are trying to reuse less amount of whatever you have planned. That also comes under the project size. Then end users resist system, meaning whatever is being developed, how much are the end users trying to face those things. That is nothing but the business risks. It is leading up to some 40%. Next, you have some deadlines that have to be tightened. Again, it is nothing but the business risk. So these are the risk whatever in general will be experienced by a software development team. So I repeat, it is the size, it is the number of users, it is the end user's notion, the delivery deadline, and delivery deadline tightened. That also is a business risk where we cannot execute the things properly. And funding will be lost. Okay. Now when you say funding will be lost, it is regarding to the customer. And customer will change the requirements. Whenever you are changing the requirements, the project size also will be varying. Okay. And then technology expectations leads to the technological expectation category. And lack of training on tools, these are also the development category. Next, you have staff inexperience, staff turnover is high. So they come under the staff and staff categories, these two things. What staff which are inexperienced and you're trying to put them in work where they are not able to actually project what type of risks are there and what type of estimates they can be doing on that particular risks. So all these are having some impact factors. Now what are these impact factors which are having numbers here? As we have discussed in the categories priorly, your one is the catastrophic, meaning there is a harm to the project or a product, and critical, wherein you can have a proper focus on it and remove it, and marginal is nothing but very minimal effects, negligible you can neglect. So these 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 have been jotted down here under each and every risk. So this particular one of size estimate is given impact 2, that is critical category, impact is 2. And when you say end users, it is trying to take 3, that is marginal. End users meaning you can change their requirements, try to give them the apt things. So they have put under marginal, wherein it is trying to say that it is minimal changes that can be made. So like that, basing upon these requirements, we are having the relevant impact factors towards it. Okay. Another example, if you say staff inexperience, there are people who are not able to work or don't know what that work is. They are put under the category of 2, and 2 is what? Critical. Critical meaning sometimes the person who is not knowledgeable and is trying to implement something, then again there may be some code issues and all those things. That is why they have put 2. Instead, you cannot put 4 because you cannot neglect if the staff is inexperienced. Like that, basing upon whatever project or product you are taking out, you can list out some risks, place them under one category, then give them some probability of their occurrence or likely of the risk that is to be happening, and relevant impact factors that we have stated. So this is actually a sample risk table prior to sorting. So before you sort them with their high priorities, low priorities, we are trying to make this table in this format. So moving further, we have some things to be noted. What are the major things that happen when you are trying to build that particular table? So the probability value for each risk is estimated by the team members individually. So this is a very, very important point. As we have stated, probability values over here, that is 60, 30, 70, 40, 50 and so on. Okay. What is he saying over here? The probability values of each risk can be estimated by team members individually. That is, people who are working in a team, they work according to the task given to them. So if you consider that person individually, he only can say that this particular risk is having so much probability, right? The team lead will not be able to tell. Only when under the team members individually can sort out that this particular risk is of this probability. Next, once all these probabilities have stated, the impact of each risk is assessed. Now, what did we say? Here we have probabilities, and then also you have impact in the third column, right? So, based upon the probabilities, you are trying to state how much of impact values there are these risks taking, right? Next, you have the third point, which states each risk component is assessed using categorizations presented in the above table. That is, you are trying to monitor them you basing upon the components. That is again stated in the above table. Next, what are the four main components we have seen? You are talking about the performance of it. You are talking about the support, cost, and the schedule. So I will show you where is this? The previous one. Whatever we have shown here, if you can see the table, components, we have performance, we have support, we have cost and schedule. So this again is linked up to how do you categorize them in a much better way. Okay, so these are overall, you are trying to take the average of it and trying to create an overall impact value. So all this is interlinked. So moving further, whatever the four columns of the risk table has been completed, we start to sort the things. That is, sorting is initiated once the four columns of this is filled in. Okay, so I will show you these four things, that is the risks, the categories, probabilities and impacts. Once all these things are filled up, what we do, we are supposed to sort by probability and by impact. So once you are sorting all these, it leads you to the higher probability and lower probability. So when you say higher probability, it moves up to the top of the table, and the lower priorities will drop down to the bottom. Okay, now this process is called first order risk prioritization. Right. Now once the table is ready, you are trying to do sorting, trying to bring the high priorities and trying to bring the low priorities. Next, what are we supposed to do is, we have something called the cutoff line. Okay, the cutoff line is drawn horizontally at the point in the table. What is that trying to do? We can study the resultant sorted table and define a cutoff line. So whenever you are creating that particular table, knowing the high priority risks, low priority risks, you can sort them out and talk about the cutoff line. Okay, now what is this cutoff line? It is drawn horizontally in the table, implies that only risks that lie above the line will be given further attention, meaning whatever cutoff line you are drawing, whatever risks are above the line will be concentrated more, and whatever will follow below will be checked upon once the top level things are done. Now, referring to the below figure, risk, impact and probability will influence the management concern. So I repeat, we are trying to talk about the categories and the components. Then we are trying to build a table where we are describing different types of errors and giving them a probability, their impact value. Once that is done, we are able to find out what are the high probability risks and what are the low probability risks. Once this is done, you are having a cutoff line. So now why is this cutoff line important? Because above the cutoff line, whatever we are having, we need to focus only on those errors. That is called risk projection. Whatever are below will be of later use or later concern. Okay, now I have a diagram which shows a graph sort of thing, which is trying to talk about the risk, impact and the probability that is having influence on the management concern. So let us have a look at the diagram, which is talking about the risk and management concern. So if you can see in the diagram, what are the things that have been stated in the diagram? We are having a very low, we have very high, and then the probability of occurrence also is stated in this line to be 1.0. And here you are having this management concern. Okay, this line is talking about the probability of occurrence. This line is talking about the impact and how much difference that is creating. Obviously, the center one will be 0. So whenever you're talking of probability of occurrence, it is 1.0. That can be substituted in the formulas, that is whatever we have in the risk projection. And as you go up, it is leading to high, and whatever is leading from the low to the high is the management concern. So here you have this particular line which is trying to state is regarding the risk factor, meaning you are not trying to focus much on the risk factor at this particular level. Right. So now, when you talk about the above diagram which is depicted, the risk factor that has high impact but very low probability, what it has to do is the occurrence should not be absorbed significant amount of management time. So I repeat, whatever risk factor that is having a high impact, that is, it may have 1 and very low probability, then it should not absorb a significant amount of the management time. That is, it should not involve much of the management time. And if you are high impact risks and a moderate high probability, if you have, however, high impact risk with moderate to high probability and low impact risk with higher probability can be carried forward into risk analysis steps. So I repeat, if the risk factor or the risk that we have listed out, which are having high impact and low probability, you don't have to focus much on them. If your high impact risks have high probability, can be carried forwarded to be included to do the following things. As I told you, the risks that are above cutoff line, we need to concentrate. The risks that are below the cutoff line, we can ignore that for a while once the above things are sorted out. Okay. Now, on what things you need to concentrate on? We are supposed to concentrate on high impact risks with high probability. Now, to have a focus on all these things, we are supposed to follow some particular steps, right? They are nothing but all risks that lie above the cutoff line should be managed. We have just discussed. Whatever will come above the cutoff line have to be managed and focused. Now, in our previous table, the RMM was a blank column. Now, what are you doing this RMM? It is trying to point out risk mitigation, monitoring and management plan. So, that was left blank there because once all these things are over, that is listing out the risks, their probabilities and how much are their occurrences, how are they trying to be on the higher priority, lower priority. Once all these things are done, then we go into the mitigation, monitoring and management plan. So how do we do all these things? They are done by the collection of risk sheets, okay, in the form of a risk sheet format or a template. So alternatively, a collection of risk information sheets is developed where all the things are lying above the cutoff, right? Yeah. Now, assessing risk impact. What is this saying? This is a next category under risk projection. What is he asking? How do we access the consequences of a risk? Meaning, what you will do when you are experiencing a flaw in a project or a product, which is called as a risk. So what are the things that you can do? You can either get the average probability of occurrence for each component. We have 4 components that have been stated. Try to determine the average probability. Else, using the assessment table, whatever table we have stated, determine impact of each component. That's another way of how do you know the consequences. Or the third way is complete the risk table and then analyze. If you want to just have a look one after the other, what you can do? Take an average probability occurrence for each risk component. Else, use an impact table that is trying to show you about the criteria. Else, you are supposed to complete the risk table and then analyze the results. This is how you can assess the consequences of a risk. Meaning, you have faced some risk. What are the consequences to it? Okay. Now, this particular risk exposure can be calculated with RE, which is nothing but risk exposure, which is a product of P and C. What is this P? How much of probability does the risk occur? And what is the cost of the project? So this in mathematical notations will be discussed in the other videos. So here I'm trying to tell you about what exactly each terminologies will be spoken in software development. So you can calculate the risk exposure by the product of the probability of occurrences to the cost of the risk that is being occurred. Right. Once risk projection is done, the next phase that we move is the risk refinement. Okay, the term itself is saying refinement. What are you trying to refine? From the existing things, some 10 sheets I have drawn something completely on the 10 sheets, out of which the 11th sheet is my final one. So out of 10 different risks or things that have been executed, you're trying to bring something new out of it. That is, you're trying to refine it. Okay, how you can refine it? You can refine using this CTC format, which says condition, transition, sequence. So for example, if you are given a particular condition, what is the consequences? That there is a concern regarding this consequence. Suppose if I say, if A divided by B is there, what is the consequence to it? There is an error that occurs. So like this, whatever risks you are stating, what are the consequences you will get? That is for risk refinement. You are trying to make it much better. Give them some consequence for the existing ones, like this. Next. So for that, there are some general conditions that have been stated. What are the general conditions? It is nothing but you are trying to use some reusable components where the third party involvement was there with no knowledge about the internal design standards. So general conditions that have been designed for refinement. So we have the CTC format which stated condition and its consequences. Now these conditions can be of any cadre. To describe these conditions or to elaborate them about these conditions, you have stated some sub-conditions like 1, 2, 3. What is it trying to say? It is trying to say that certain reusable components were developed by a third party with no knowledge of internal design standards, meaning you can refine them, stating that the execution of things was done with no prior knowledge of the design standards. That comes under the condition number 1, that is sub-condition. Next, the design standard for component interfaces have not been set and may not conform to existing reusable components. That is, whatever design standard is there, it is not properly suitable. That comes under the sub-condition 2. Next, we have sub-condition 3, which states that some reusable components have been implemented in a language which is not supported by the target environment. Meaning, whenever you are trying to execute in some kind of an environment, whatever things that you are trying to implement, it is not working in that, or whatever language you are taking is not fitting into this particular environment. It is not fitting into this particular environment. So whenever you are trying to refine some risks, the condition has to be stated properly, then the consequences accordingly also has to be stated properly. Right. Next discussion is on risk mitigation, monitoring and management, which was called as R, M, M and M. That is risk mitigation, monitoring and management. Okay. So let us have a look at what exactly happens in this. Who are the people involved in this? What are the tasks they have? So what can we do to mitigate a risk? What are the things you can do to mitigate a particular risk? The first one is meet with the current staff. Okay, these are the steps to talk about how you can mitigate a risk. So firstly, you are supposed to meet the current staff to know about what causes happen. Okay, those causes could be the poor conditions, the low pay, competitive job market. Try to know all the things. That is the first stage. That is trying to know various things from the customer. Next, mitigate those causes that are under control before the project you have started. Before you have started the project, you try to know about those things. Next, once the project commences or once the project has been started, you are trying to assume some turnover and develop a particular continuity when people leave. So these are the steps how you can mitigate, that is trying to organize them properly. Then try to organize project teams so that information about each development activity is widely dispersed. That is, you're trying to divide them properly. So I repeat, when we are talking about the risk mitigation, monitoring and management phase, firstly, there are some steps that to be known. What are we trying to do to mitigate a risk? That is to remove, avoid, or some kind of things that you can do to mitigate a risk. Firstly, what are you supposed to do? Know who are the present staff that are actually working. Try to know what are the low conditions from them, or try to know about why is the things in a lower manner and why is the cost reduced. All these things has to be known. So you can mitigate whatever has been stated before you start off a project. That's the second point. Next, once you are started off doing the project, try to keep the points that have been stated by the people and then have a proper continuity. And then you have to organize them in such a proper way that they are equally divided, and the information about each development is widely dispersed. That is, every department knows what exactly has to be done. Okay, and then you are supposed to define a work product standards. Okay, once the team is knowing what they have to do, then you can talk about the standards, their mechanisms in a proper, timely manner with proper documents. Okay, once the work product is ready with the standards and all, then you are supposed to have some meetings kinds of things. That is the peer reviews. And then assign a backup staff member who tries to monitor this on a whole. Generally for every critical technologist, he says, meaning good at everything, and he has to monitor all the things that have to be done. So all these tasks are performed in the risk mitigation. Now, what exactly do you know about this RMM plan? What is this plan needed for? This column was blank when we were discussing about the table, right? This is nothing but a strategy that elaborates a project plan. Whatever project you are talking about, this RMM, that is from the starting to the end, it gives you a clear picture. A particular plan is being depicted in a form of a template. Okay, it is also called as risk management, that is management on a whole. Just before we have seen the first M, that is the mitigation, right? Now risk management is trying to talk about the entire software project plan. Okay, now what is this trying to tell you? It is trying to organize various or separate steps for the three things, that is mitigation, monitoring and management. What do you do in mitigation? What do you do in monitoring? And what is a management plan? So to do all this in a plan, you are trying to document all the works as a part of the analysis of a risks, which is done again by a project manager, and he is a part of the entire project plan. So I repeat, you are having an RMM plan where mitigation, monitoring and management are three different fields where the project manager is trying to involve, document all these things in a proper way, and he's trying to perform as a part of risk analysis, and he is also responsible in a overall project plan discussion. Okay, next. Now to do all these things, what do we require? As I told you, you require a sheet. That sheet is called RIS, Risk Information Sheet. So please remember, RMM plan's task is to create a RIS sheet, which is almost considered as an end task for the risk management. I repeat, under the category of risk management, RMM plan is trying to give a risk information sheet which is trying to elaborate various things on a whole. Okay, so the first point or the continuation to the previous ones that have been discussed, RMM, some software teams do not develop this formal RMM document. So that time what happens, when every software team is not having a formal RMM document, then you have a scope of creating this RIS sheet where each risk is documented individually. This is very, very important. Documenting the things individually is via the risk information sheet. In most cases, the risk is maintained using a database system. I'm sorry, it is not risk, RIS, that is risk information sheet is in a database system. That is, you're trying to have different kinds of tables in a database management database system which is acting as a server. That shows the creation, the information entry, priority, searching, and other things are done easily because everything is noted in the database system. So whatever you want, you can retrieve. It's same like a database management system. If you want to find out the details of an employee, you just write a query and you can retrieve that particular output. Okay, the format of the RIS is being shown before. Now, what does this exactly do is, once the RMM has been documented, the project has begun, risk mitigation and monitoring steps will be commencing. That is, you are starting. So, what is the last point trying to say? Once you have documented everything in the RMM, once a project is starting, the risk mitigation and monitoring steps also will start simultaneously. So have a look at the risk RIS. This is called as RIS. So for some project teams, they are not involved in RMM. That is, they are not involved in this process. That time what happens? You can actually do this sheet or prepare this sheet individually within a team. So what is this sheet trying to show us? Since we are storing everything in a database, you are supposed to have a proper ID to it. You can see here risk ID is here and a proper date to it has to be specified. What is the probability of what is the impact of it? Is it high, low, medium, anything? Okay. And you are supposed to describe about that particular risks. Description in the sense it should talk about what are the main things you are trying to focus on. And whatever descriptions you have given. For example, over here, only 70% of software components scheduled for reuse. The remaining functionality will be custom developed, it is there. So that is the basic description you have provided for the risk that you are stating. Okay. Now, whatever description you have stated, try to have some refinement for that. How can you refine it? Specify the subconditions we have stated. What is a subcondition that has, what is a subcondition 2 and 3, the description can have. Then you will try to monitor in the next phase. And then we will try to have a management and then the current status, who is the originator and who is the assigned value. So this is about the RIS, which is very, very helpful when you don't have an RMM plan for a project. So individually, each and every employee, team member can do this and can be retrieved at any particular amount of time. Okay. Now, risk mitigation is a problem avoidance activity. This is very, very important. In the RMM plan, to avoid a problem, the phase is risk mitigation. In risk monitoring, you are trying to trace the activity of a project. And the main goals of the risk monitoring is nothing but, firstly, you are supposed to access the predicted risks. Second, try to have some, to ensure a risk of refinement of the risks has to be done. And then collect the information for the future use. So I repeat, to avoid some kind of a problem, we involve in the risk mitigation phase. In risk monitoring, you are trying to use them as a project activity that involves the 3 different goals. The first goal is to access whether predicted risks occur or not. Second one is to ensure that the risks are refined. Then the third one is try to collect all of them for the future use. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.